you in touch with what's going on with us. And of course, our speaker today is Sam Brennand, VP of Customer Service Success at OnCall Health. He has spent a decade working in a variety of account management and customer success leadership roles at VA Partners, Uberflip, InVision, and now at OnCall Health. I'm really excited for him to share his knowledge, and I hope that you can implement what you hear today in your own business. And now I will have Sam share his screen, and we can get the session started.
All right, thank you so much. It is great to be here. Thanks for having me at the Innovation Factory, which could be in person, but I guess virtually just as fun these days. So let me start sharing my screen.
Perfect.
There we go. And just to confirm, seeing the slides now?
Yep, we are all good.
All right, perfect. So I got a pretty good introduction there, but I thought I'd give you a little bit more, maybe on the personal side. So I was born, raised, still live in Toronto. Actually live like 3 blocks from my parents, which is funny, but like the neighborhood. My wife, Emily, a new baby who's almost a year old, Nora, and a very annoying dog who might chime into the conversation today. So sorry if you hear her. Used to love to travel, but now, like everybody else, definitely not doing so much of that. So enjoying just being locked in my house with an 11-month-old and an annoying dog. As mentioned, my previous experience, a couple of different customer success roles. I'm currently serving as the VP of Customer Success at OnCall Health. Prior to that, I was in CS leadership roles at Uberflip and at InVision. But I got my start actually with Mr. Mark Elliott, who's on the call today over at Venture Accelerator Partners. If you do need any sort of marketing or sales support as an early stage startup that's growing, chat with Mark. He's got lots of great things he can help you out with. And a little bit about OnCall Health before we get too far into the presentation. We are a virtual care platform, and it is a good time to be in the virtual care industry. So our vision really is to enable healthcare systems, but more often brands, individuals, practices, and healthcare enterprises to launch secure, on-brand virtual care programs, either within a current patient experience or as a brand new program itself. We have tons of resources available that help companies launch those programs. We've got lots of tools designed to help them grow and attract new patients, as well as evolve those programs with key insights and analytics about how their programs are performing. And it's been a wild year. We're currently up to about 40 people and growing. That number's probably already out of date given how much hiring we've been doing. Last year was a very interesting time to be in this space. The company actually grew 3x in a year, actually doubled in 1 month during the pandemic. So it was a crazy time. And we now are very proud to power over 1 million virtual care appointments per year, which is really exciting. And that number's growing really, really fast. So here's our agenda for today. I'm going to walk through 5 of the things that I've learned over the last 10 years in working in a variety of customer success roles at a couple different companies. The first is a very important one, always an important place to start, is how to identify a value metric. We'll call it the North Star metric, and how that trickles down into how you can plan your customer success team's growth. We'll walk through an approach to effectively and as pragmatically as possible mapping the customer journey. We'll talk about success plans, which is the topic that's near and dear to my heart. And then we'll run through real quick some of the best approaches I've found to leveraging CS technologies, as well as how you can build out a success team if you're just getting started. And throughout the presentation today, please feel free to tell me to shut up if you have questions. It's a pretty small group, so if you have questions about anything you see, let's just dig into it. In the moment, you can use the chat box, raise your hand, and we'll get that question answered as we go. All right, so let's start with identifying your organization's North Star metric. And a good place to start is by talking about what a North Star metric is. So this is actually a concept that stems really from product teams in SaaS companies. And it, at its heart, is really just a definition, or sorry, it's a way that you can measure a value exchange. It's the definition. And it stems from product management organizations who are trying to find the best ways that they can align their goals with their customers' goals. It really naturally stems from an in-depth understanding of what value your product or your service is ultimately providing your customer. And because of that, One thing I wanted to mention is this is really not like a CS thing. It should be part of a larger project where you are partnering with marketing, with sales, with every single person in your company to really understand what shared North Star metric you should have as an organization. You can have individual metrics based on the product lines you might have, the services you might provide, but it's really beneficial if everyone can align around one North Star metric. So a couple examples from companies you're probably familiar with. Our friends at Spotify have a North Star metric of time spent listening to music. And if everyone at Spotify knows that everything we do should be oriented around optimizing and increasing the amount of time that customers spend listening to music, it really helps them guide what they should be doing day to day. Likewise, at Facebook, it's actually a really interesting story. They've gone through a couple iterations of their North Star metric, mostly playing with the time period. So might it be daily at first, then weekly? I think now they use a monthly active user metric, but obviously Facebook is all about engagement and making sure you're able to connect with friends and family. So they want to make sure you're maximizing the amount of time you spend on the platform, and that trickles down to how do you actually ultimately optimize the number of people who log in and use Facebook in a given month. Over at Airbnb, just as the last example, pretty straightforward one here. They provide a marketplace for people to book stays. So their North Star metric is the number of nights that actually get booked by the people who use their platform. And the bet with identifying and locking in a North Star metric is that as your customers get more value from your product or service, you're going to grow alongside them. So going back to this slide, if Airbnb is able to increase the number of nights that customers book, obviously says a lot about the value their customers are getting from the platform. And naturally, they're going to take a little cut of every single one of those bookings. So Airbnb is going to grow just alongside their customers as that value metric increases. An important way to start here, I think, is by going back to one of my favorite books, which is Start With Why by our friend Simon Sinek down in the bottom corner there. And it's a really important concept. You're never going to hurt yourself by asking why. And specifically thinking about the North Star metric, you can ask yourself, why do customers value your product or service? Or more specifically, what is the required outcome they're ultimately trying to achieve by partnering with your business? And I always like to think back to this quote. This is something that I feel like I came across at Wilfrid Laurier in the business program more than a few times in the consumer behavior classes and marketing strategy classes. It's a really famous quote by Theodore Levitt from Harvard Business School. It talks about really the difference between solutions and problems. And like as marketers, you should focus on the outcome or the need rather than what your product does. So he said that people don't want a 1/4 inch drill bit. When they go to buy one, they're actually trying to get a 1/4 inch hole. Now it's a good quote, but I actually don't love it for customer success purposes because yes, it's problem focused. Yes, it's needs focused, but it's not outcome focused, right? Nobody wants a 1/4 inch hole in their wall. What they want is to be able to then put a nail into that hole and hang a picture. So I think we can take really what Theodore was trying to say here and stretch it a little bit and apply it to how customer success teams can think about their North Star metric. And a really easy way to do that is just have two concentric overlapping circles. On the one side, you have what your customers are trying to do, what their required outcome for using your product or service is. And the other side, you've got all the things that your business does really well. Might be your services, might be your products, might be things that exist on the periphery of those things. And where those circles overlap, you will probably find your North Star metric. So let me give you an example specifically from OnCall Health, because we went through this exercise not too long ago. Our customers typically come to us for a number of reasons, but at the heart, we love working with companies or healthcare providers that are looking for ways to both improve the patient experience and grow. Like we really excel with people who have a goal of increasing the size of their practice, increasing the number of patients they're able to support, and doing so virtually. Naturally, we excel in providing a platform that makes that happen. So we have a number of tools that allow people to build a program focused on improving the patient experience and growing their practice through patient acquisition and a number of other tools. And when we think about the problems there and the solutions we're able to provide, our North Star metric was fairly obvious. It's the number of appointments that our providers are actually able to complete in a given month. And having that North Star metric as an organization allowed us to really focus in on honing our strategy in a couple areas of the business. Naturally, in the marketing, the sales team, the product team, knowing that our goal is to increase the number of appointments complete, we can build things or structure our go-to-market strategies to optimize that, but we can also do that in customer success. So thinking about implementation, for example, like how do we actually get our customers up and running on our platform? Knowing that our goal is to increase the number of appointments that we complete, we started to think through, well, how do we tweak our implementation process to make sure that that is the outcome we're after? That's what we're optimizing for in the onboarding process. We want to make it as easy as possible to book your first appointment as fast as possible. I always think back in this to what Facebook and Twitter did in their early days. They actually defined similar metrics or goals in their implementation process that were oriented around their North Star metric. So at Twitter, for example, a really famous one is that you had to follow 7 people. And what they would then do is, knowing that a customer was far more likely to be retained by the platform and successful in using Twitter, they optimized their entire onboarding experience around forcing you to find and follow 7 people that were likely to keep you engaged. And if they did that, you were far more likely to come back and far more likely to become a sticky user. So that's a similar approach that we've taken at OnCall. Like, we really try and focus in on stripping out everything that's not going to get a customer to book an appointment as fast as possible. And we'll treat that stuff as important later down the customer journey. Thinking about customer engagement, we also started to think through, well, how could we tweak our engagement process to focus on creating and completing more appointments? And this bakes in QBRs, monthly touch points. We try and orient all of our customer engagement opportunities around honing in on this North Star metric to make sure that people are ultimately booking appointments, because that's when the value is going to come for their patients. From a reporting standpoint, we think a lot about how we can optimize the data that we pass from our platform into our source of truth so that we can easily track and report on how our customers are doing this stuff at scale. So we use a platform called Django. It's the back end of our system. That's what powers our app. And we make sure to pump in as much information as possible into Salesforce so that our team can constantly track how this North Star metric is moving on an individual customer basis. Also think a lot about support, right? Even our technical support team, like, they have a lot of processes to treat customers at scale, but how can we get creative in tweaking those processes to make sure that even the support team is focused in on the number of appointments that customers are booking? And likewise, product feedback, commercial strategy, there's just an infinite number of these things that when we're planning out our customer success strategy, we can optimize to make sure that we're driving towards this North Star metric. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if we can help our customers improve this North Star metric, we're going to help them get to value a lot faster. And that's going to lead to success for OnCall's success team and our customers. So there's a couple very high level benefits of a North Star metric for CS. First and foremost, gives you clarity and alignment and allows your team to have a pretty concise framework for making decisions. 2, it provides everyone on your team with a pretty solid understanding of customer value and what they need to do, both individually as well as a team, to get customers there. And most importantly, what I love about it is it holds people accountable to an outcome. We can now pinpoint pretty much any customer and say, okay, they're not booking enough appointments based on what they've told us about their goals. What's the problem? How do we fix it? All right. So now that you've defined the North Star metric, let's move in and talk a little bit about customer success journey mapping. And this is a very interesting topic. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Great guys asking questions. It's Mark here. What was the process like at the organization to come together on a North Star metric? So you talked about customer success, marketing and sales, and of course leadership. So what was that process like to define that North Star metric amongst the group there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. No, it's joyous, messy collaboration. And what's interesting about it, and good in the long term, is it was probably a little bit of a friction-filled process, right? Everybody's going to have their own take on what the North Star metric should be based on their understanding of the customers we sell to, the segments we should target, where the market opportunity is. So really, we just brought everybody together, sat in a room, and had some pretty fun and stringent debates about what we think customers value in the platform, why they come to us. Went back to really our understanding of our ideal customers, the market opportunity, the segments that we target, the personas that represent each of those segments. And then just like continuing to ask why and why and why and why and why. and drill down. And eventually we got to consensus. Now I would say what's interesting about OnCall, and I think we're a little bit spoiled in this, is it was fairly obvious in a lot of senses, because like people come to us with a pretty straightforward need. It's like, we can't currently see our patients because we're not allowed to, and they're not comfortable going outside, and we need a way to provide them care. And ultimately, that act of providing care represents and manifests itself as an appointment. And that appointment is not the value itself, but that's how the value gets provided. So knowing that the appointment was sort of the vessel for value, we could then tie that back to every department, and everyone can just easily, quickly work through the different ways that their department can impact that. So as a product team, okay, great. Like, we need to make sure the platform is stable enough so that people can provide an appointment. Like, we have a customer self-service like booking page where people can actually just book their own appointments at any time based on their provider's availability. Like, how can we optimize that experience to make it easier, quicker, more reliable? On the sales team, right? Like, knowing that optimizing for the number of appointments is important. Like, how do we get the sales team thinking about going outbound to find people who are interested in growth, who are interested in improving the number of appointments that they want to deliver to their patients because they want to build a mental health practice, they want to introduce a new employee assistance program. Likewise for the marketing team, right? You can really hone in your go-to-market messaging around finding people who are interested in optimizing for growth again. So it was a contentious process. There's lots of friction in it, but we're a bit spoiled in that it was fairly obvious just given the nature of what we do.
Thanks, Sam.
Good question. All right, well, let's jump into journey mapping. Quick definition when we talk about the customer journey. At its core, it really is just a all-encompassing view of everything that happens to a customer as they interact with your company and your brand. And what's great about this is, instead of just looking at one part of the transaction or the experience, like the real customer journey thinks about the full experience that a customer goes through from start to hopefully never finish, right? That infinite relationship that we're all after. Now, it is really hard. Building an accurate and detailed map of the customer journey takes a huge amount of time and energy. And when you see examples of it that look like this, like it can almost be so overwhelming that you don't want to do it, right? Like, this takes a huge amount of time, a huge amount of effort. But it is important. And I do think there are ways that it can be done, especially as an early stage company that's just getting started, that doesn't have to be so all-encompassing and overwhelming. Because ultimately, if you don't do something like this, you won't have a map to get your customers to value, to get them to that North Star metric. And then it becomes very easy for your customers, and by extension, your success team, to get lost along the way and not really understand what they should be doing day in and day out. So where do you start if you're just kicking things off and you want to build out like a V1 of your customer journey? I like to start with Lincoln Murphy. And if you don't know him, he is kind of like a godfather of customer success. He was very early days at Gainsight. He's a really prominent thought leader in the customer success space. He runs a blog called 16 Ventures. If you go check it out, there's just like days worth of content you can read. And he's got this fantastic concept. He calls it the desired outcome. And it's really an equation for getting your customers to success. And it balances two important things. One is definitely the required outcomes that we've already talked about. But two, and just as important, is this idea of an appropriate experience. And you need to have both of them to ultimately get your customers to success and to build your journey map. And he gives this really good example of Southwest Airlines, right? I guess he's a pretty frequent flyer and not the biggest fan of Southwest Airlines. So the example that he'll give is like, let's say you've got someone who's young, early in their career, looking to get away for spring break before the pandemic, doesn't travel too often. Maybe they're budget conscious. They're really just looking to get from point A to point B without spending too much money. Southwest is probably a really good fit, right? Like, you're going to get that required outcome of going from point A to point B, and it's an appropriate experience because you don't care about the no frills. Your goal is ultimately to save money. So you have that required outcome and you have that appropriate experience. On the flip side, you got somebody like Lincoln. who travels a lot. He really values the service piece. He's maybe a little bit later in life. He wants to be comfortable. He's willing to pay a little bit more for that experience. So if he gets on Southwest, like, it's not the appropriate experience. Like, yes, he's going to go from point A to point B, so his required outcome is achieved, but the appropriate experience isn't there. So he's going to be upset about it, and ultimately, like, probably not going to think that that was a successful outcome. So that approach, right? You have your required outcome, which is the what needs to happen. You've got the appropriate experience, which is the how it needs to happen. And that's ultimately where you're going to get to that desired outcome of value. And this is the way that I think we can approach building our customer success journeys. So I have a very simple with an asterisk model that we can use to kind of kick this process off. Caveat being, of course, that simple does not mean easy. There's still a lot of work involved in this. It still requires you to do some homework and to iterate over time. But hopefully this can be a pretty easy framework that can lessen the burden of jumping into this process. So we're going to use our typical questions. We're going to start with what, we're going to move into the who, we're going to get to the how, and then we're going to talk about the when. Precursor to this, though, is I think it is important to start with a really simple map. This can be very easy to overcomplicate, but at the end of the day, whether or not you sell a service or you have a product, whether you're SaaS or you're not SaaS, the customer journey is like pretty simple, right? You have people who are deciding to use your tool. They're going to start using your tool, and they're going to use it for a period of time, which is usually governed by your contract. And then at the end of that, they're going to decide again, am I getting enough value to continue working with this service provider or this product? If not, they're going to leave. But hopefully this process just continues. So we'll come back to this, but just keep this in mind, because what we do with all of those other questions are ultimately going to layer back into this model. So let's jump into the what. And we'll start with the goal of a journey map. As I mentioned, it's really to ensure that every customer has a map to value. And more importantly, as your team grows, that your customer success team knows what they need to do tactically to get them there. So value is the destination. And what's a great measure of value, as we've talked about? We've got our North Star metric. So you've got that required outcome, you've got your strengths. In between, hopefully you've done the work to figure out that North Star. And it's a good starting point, but I don't think you can stop there, right? Like, your North Star metric is ultimately going to be that vessel for value, but it's not the value unto itself. So what you can do is work with your sales team and your marketing team to document every single required outcome that you've ever heard from your customer in the sales process. So at OnCall, that could mean, I want to grow my practice. I want to make it easier for patients to book themselves, thus saving my admin team time from having to book appointments for them. Now, I want to get a better understanding of how virtual care is impacting my business. Like, make an exhaustive list of all of the reasons people come to you, of all of the outcomes that they're trying to achieve by partnering with your business. You can do that by having a really good customer handoff process as well. So at OnCall, we've got a process like this. It's a pretty meaty Google Doc, but it's a Google Doc. So it's fairly simple. And every single time the sales team closes a deal, they're going to come in here, they're going to fill out all of this information about exactly what happened in the sales process, what the business case is, what they're buying, what their workflow is, and what those required outcomes that were discussed were. So this part's fairly simple. Next, we can move into the who, and this is where things get a little bit more complicated. And there's two things that you probably need to think about when you're thinking about the who of a customer journey. There's your team, and then there's your customer. We'll come back to the your team part, because that part's actually fairly simple. Basically, it's like which teams and which people are going to be involved at various stages of this journey. What's more interesting, and what I want to talk about more, is the customer side of things. This is the personas. So we'll pause on the your team. Let's dig into personas. Now, let's start by thinking about a simple buying process. This is a classic marketing model. You've got awareness, interest, desire, and action. We can also think about a classic selling process where we're going to connect with people, we're going to qualify them, we're going to nurture them, we're going to close them. And in between, you've got lots of helpful stuff for customer success. So at the heart of that, you've got your personas, right? Like, this is how your marketing team is going out and trying to attract people and bring them into your funnel. This is how your sales team is understanding how to speak to those people. And there's a lot of value in that for customer success to understand as well. So quick definition of personas: detailed descriptions of someone who represents your target audience, right? This is a fairly straightforward process to work through. should be an early stage thing that you do for your business. And important to remember, it's not a real customer necessarily, but it's a fictional representation of a person or a business that embodies the characteristics of your best potential customers. Really fantastic tool to use early in that buying process, that sales process, and the buyer journey or the buying process. But it's just as powerful when you extend it into the process of the customer success journey. And in my experience, personas tend to kind of stop right when people make the decision, right? Like marketing uses them great, sales uses them great. And then it's like, we kind of forget about them when it comes time to actually start implementing a product, or when we need to start thinking about how we grow our relationship with a customer over time. And it doesn't have to be that way. And this is a really handy tool I think you can use to make sure that you're extending your personas into the customer implementation and maintenance process over time. And it's a really simple tool, again, from the world of product management, but it's called an empathy map. And what you do with an empathy map is just put your user at the core and run through a quick brainstorming exercise with your team. You can loop your customers into this as well, of all of the things they're feeling. They're thinking, they're feeling, they're saying, they're doing, their goals ultimately during their time as a customer. And I think a really handy way to go back to our simple model here is to actually build one of these empathy maps for every single stage. So when people are deciding to use your product, when they're actually implementing your product or your service, and then they're using it on an ongoing basis, you can build these empathy maps for every single individual stage. So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, let's think about persona A, and let's think about the decide stage, right? When people are making that leap and saying, I would like to sign with your company. So if our user was a manager, let's say at OnCall Health, they're a manager of virtual care. Things that they might say to us in this process are like, we needed a virtual care solution yesterday because it's a pandemic now, right? Or we have really aggressive growth goals. We need to double the size of our clinic in the next 12 months. We want to build a competitor to Talkspace, and we're really eager to get going. Things they're thinking in that process, I hope I'm making the right decision, right? Like I'm putting my butt on the line if I'm deciding to sign with OnCall. So I need to be confident that I'm investing in the right tool. Might also be thinking, could I have gotten a better price? Did I get the right package? Things they're doing in that process, probably going and having to convince other members of their team that this is the right decision, this is the right solution. They're probably actually introducing us to the rest of the team, pulling in various people who are going to be using or implementing the tool. And feeling, I think ultimately the most important one, they're probably stressed. They're probably a little bit scared about the nature of that decision. They're feeling uncertain. At the same time, they're excited. They want to get into the process. They want to implement it. They're feeling hopeful about how using a tool like OnCall Health could transform their business and help their patients. And ultimately, their goals could be things like growing the business, saving their team time, reducing their cost, or leading to happier, healthier patients. So now that we've talked through the who, we've talked through personas, we've talked through how you can actually use a empathy map to get a little bit deeper on how those personas are feeling at each stage of that process. Let's talk about the how. So we've defined the what, we've got the outcomes, we've got the who, where we've thought about personas and empathy maps. That's our required outcome and our appropriate experience. And that is a really handy way to get to the set of activities, or the how, between we're actually going to deliver these things to them. So let's use OnCall as an example again. We've got two desired outcomes for two different personas here. All right, one might be a tech-savvy psychotherapist. They could be looking for an easy-to-use platform to connect with patients. Second persona could be a primary care clinic, and primary care clinics often are a little bit less tech-savvy, so they have higher support needs. And oftentimes, primary care clinics have aging patient bases that are not comfortable using technology. And they are really, really eager to find a tool that is easy to use, but also like outwardly safe and secure for their patients to use. Might even be an especially big need during a pandemic. So thinking about the appropriate experience for each of them, knowing that we have a very tech-savvy psychotherapist, like, we don't need to hold their hands. Like, they know how to use technology. We've worked through our empathy map, understand that they're just eager to get going. They're feeling excited. They really just need to be supported and empowered with resources. Appropriate experience for that primary care clinic that is a little bit less tech savvy, needs a little bit more handholding, is one that we need to really focus in on, like handholding, nurturing, leading, walking them through the change management process. So with those two things, like the activities actually become fairly obvious, right? Like we know that with a tech savvy psychotherapist that needs to be empowered, we need to invest in resources and self-serve resources to help them get quickly set up and launch their virtual care program as fast as possible. On the flip side, if we're working with that primary care clinic that needs to be nurtured, that's where our professional services team comes in, right? Like they're going to partner with you, they're going to hold your hand to build a plan that gets not only into how we launch the program, but how we educate your low-tech populations, like aging patients, to make sure that they feel comfortable accessing and receiving care through a virtual care platform. And finally, let's talk about the when, an important, very important last step that actually will tie this all together into something that you probably think looks more like a traditional journey map. And the key thing with thinking about the when is like, what are your moments of truth? And the way that McKinsey defines this is as being the moments when long-term relationships really get made or broken. And what's interesting about moments of truth is they're often intimately connected with the things that you've identified as being like really strong feelings in your persona empathy maps. So let's use that example of a tech savvy psychotherapist who has low experience needs, and we know we need to build self-service resources quickly. Like we can go through this decide, implement, use example and actually pinpoint all of these moments of truth. So one certainly happens in the decide phase, where people are going to actually take the jump and say, I want to work with OnCall. And they're probably feeling really afraid. Like, did I make the right decision? Is there another tool that might have better met my needs? So we know we need to think about that. At the end of this journey in the use phase, like pretty obvious question, are we achieving our required outcomes? And was it delivered in an appropriate experience? If it was, the moment of truth is let's keep going. If not, maybe I need to search for another tool. So knowing that these are our moments of truth, we can then think about how these actions trickle down into each of those stages. So for something like expansion, right, knowing that a customer needs to get up and running quickly with self-serve resources, we can think through, well, how do we proactively highlight additional use cases for them in the platform? Maybe we can use a tool that proactively suggests case studies for them or introduces other potential business ideas for them. Can we build a self-serve upgrade flow actually into our product? So if they do decide to add additional providers into the platform or launch a new program, they don't even need to talk to sales. They don't even need to talk to CS. They can just do it themselves. And even more so, like maybe we can tweak our pricing model, right? Like maybe we can make it so easy for them to just launch into adding new users that, like, again, they don't even need to talk to a salesperson to grow with OnCall and to expand their businesses. They can just do it. And once you've done that, this is that final step. It looks probably a little bit more like the typical buyer journeys or customer journeys that you've seen, where you can think about how you overlay the roles of individual teams onto those moments of truth. So you can map each one of your personas. You can list out all the individual teams that need to be a part of delivering or helping meet those moments of truth. And it's fairly simple to just say, like, great, we know a moment of truth, that happens in the decide stage is that feeling of, oh, did I make the right decision? Well, the way we can meet that need is by partnering with the marketing team to make sure that the first thing a customer sees after they close is a case study to reinforce that, like, yes, you made the right decision. And here's an example of a customer who came to us with a similar problem and how we've been able to make them wildly successful. So we're just trying to get in and make sure that post-purchase dissonance gets leveled out very quickly. So wrapping things up, how you map the journey. Important first step, understand your required outcomes. Ideally, it's related to your North Star, but it doesn't stop there. 2, use empathy maps to make sure you understand what the appropriate experience looks like for each one of the personas that's involved in both buying and using your product or your service. 3, document each of the key activities that need to happen to ensure that the outcomes are occurring as part of the appropriate experience. And then finally, think about the when. When do each of these activities need to happen to make sure that at that moment of truth, things are trending in the right direction.
Hey, does anybody else, I have a question, but I'll wait and see if anybody else has a question for Sam. Lots of great content being shared. Does anybody have any questions on anything he's presented so far? You can raise your hand and unmute and ask Sam a question.
Fire away, I'll take your question, Mark.
I was going to say a question slash comment, because one of the things I think is really interesting is when you're, from a sales perspective, when I'm selling, the person that makes the decision on a solution may not be the one using the solution, right? And so it's really, I like the frame of, okay, so because really from a customer churn perspective, if the user of the solution isn't uptaking, it can negatively impact the lifetime value of that client. So that's really gets me thinking about a few other things about how to as part of that customer success and what what kind of things you need to pivot or tweak with the buyer persona, almost like a user persona, as you said, so that they can they can be doing what they need to be done and have long-term success. So yeah, that was more of a comment than a question, but I really thought that was a good point. So thank you.
No, it's a good one, right? And it's something that that honestly actually comes to mind from my time at InVision. Like it was something that we needed to pay special attention to. Is there was a considerable difference between the people who were making the decision to buy the tool and the people who actually used it. And at InVision, when I was a strategic CSM there, like I worked with really large, like Fortune 10 companies. So there was often like thousands of individual users, but maybe one VP or C-suite level person sort of making the buying decision, and they're making like a very big decision. And if you drop the ball with either of those groups, it was ultimately very painful, right? Like, yes, you need to make sure that the people signing the checks understand the value. And in that case, you're probably thinking more about the business value. But if you lose sight of the end users, that's where you start to see people peel off into other solutions, right? Like they're finding little things on the side that maybe solve their individual needs a bit better than the way that you're thinking about it. So it's, as a CSM, it's a very hard thing to do, but it is really important to make sure you have that constant pulse on like every single persona that's involved, both in buying and using your product.
Thanks, Sam.
All right, well, let's talk about success plans. As I mentioned, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. We spent a lot of time investing in this at InVision and now at OnCall Health again, because I do think they are probably the most important part of building a high-performing customer success team, and it's all about alignment. So what is a success plan? Very simple way to capture and validate what your customers care about. With that understanding, you can easily map out how your organization can help them achieve those goals. And the way that you do that is by figuring out what are the outcomes they need to achieve from the strategies. This is what a typical success plan looks like actually at OnCall. I blanked out some of the information here. But it's a really simple framework, and we're going to go through each one of these pieces in more detail just to show you how it works. So the framework itself is not something that we invented by any means. It's a really standard framework actually called OGSM. And it starts with an idea or an understanding of what your customers are ultimately trying to achieve by using your product or service. So we've already talked about this a lot this morning. This is your North Star, right? Like this is the value. This is their ultimate business objective. Next step is the goals. So these are milestones that need to be achieved in order for that objective to become attainable. Third step is the strategies, and this is how your product or service will help achieve the established goals that ladder into the objective. And then last, but certainly not least, you've got the idea of measures, right? So these are metrics that you can use to track that the strategies are being effective at achieving the goals that are driving the objective. So I have this arrow here, sort of like shows that things kind of trickle down, which they do, but it's important to remember they go back the other way as well, right? The measures need to ladder into the strategies, need to ladder into the goals, need to ladder into the objective. So let's start by thinking about objectives. And this actually, Mark, is something that you taught me when I was like fresh out of university, and it's stuck in my head ever since. really, there are like four big business objectives, right? This is a little bit of an oversimplification, but at the core, like people want to do something because they're going to make money, they're going to save money, they're going to find an efficiency, or they're going to reduce risk in some way. And I would venture that like 99% of the time when you're asking customers what their objective are, it's going to be one of these four things. So thinking about at OnCall, we start with the making money. We often see people who come to us saying, I really want to grow my practice. So I want to increase the number of patients that I'm able to see in a day because that's going to increase the amount of money I have in my bank account at the end of the month. Often we also see people say, I want to save some money. So in a pandemic, it's not unusual for people to want to get rid of their physical office space and only provide virtual care because it's become much more accepted by patients. And this is a really easy way to improve your bottom line. We also see a lot of people looking for efficiencies. So they'll come to us saying things like, I want to save my clinical staff time in the patient intake process, right? And it's not a good use of their time to be on the phone asking people basic questions. Let's just send them a form and have them fill out that information themselves. Or we want to reduce risk. So I know that virtual care is the way of the future. I don't want my practice to get left behind when people start to make that shift. Another example. So when I was at Uberflip, so everyone knows, Uberflip is a content marketing platform, helps marketing teams manage and scale their content so that it can do things like drive customer engagement or increase the number of leads people get. So when they come to us, it's like, hey, we need to get more marketing qualified leads. Our sales team needs to close more opportunities. And the best way to do that is by keeping the top of the funnel full. Or we want to save money. So like we're spending way too much money maintaining our homegrown website marketing solution, and we think we can save money by using Uberflip to do it. We want to get more efficient. It takes us way too much time to manage our marketing content. A typical enterprise marketing team has thousands of pieces of marketing collateral. Could be everything from an ebook to a video, and it's pretty time consuming and painful to manage it. So can Uberflip help me do that more efficiently? Or we want to reduce risk, right? Like we need to make sure that we can actually prove the value of our marketing spend, right? Marketing teams often get thought of as a cost center, and Uberflip could help them reduce that risk by showing people how marketing actually influences revenue and drives business. And then finally, just to hammer home the point, let's think through this from my time at InVision. So InVision is a digital prototyping tool. Actually, every one of the Fortune 100 companies uses InVision to build great products faster. So it's a collaboration tool that allows designers, product managers, and engineers to collaborate on the digital experiences they create much better. So you might ask, how does that lead to making money? Well, if you can launch better products faster, you can grow faster, you can attract new patients. You can even like hyper localize that down to a specific part of your journey. Like we need to optimize, the sign up experience, right? And thinking about like that moment of truth when you ask a customer to put in their credit card, that experience isn't well designed. People aren't going to do it. So you can actually use InVision to dramatically improve the amount of customers you bring through the door. Or you can save money. In the design world, a lot of customers spend way too much money on individual tools. Like they have a tool for every single thing you can imagine. InVision as a product suite bundles that all together and can actually help people save. Also want to drive efficiencies. And oftentimes in the digital product design process, rework is a big issue, right? Like people don't talk to each other through the process. So what the design team designs is not what the development team builds. And then you go back to the drawing board and you've lost several weeks and lots of money. So that rework can be quite costly, and it can also cost a lot in terms of time and missed opportunities. And then finally, reducing risk. So security and compliance, pretty important because InVision was used to design new products and experiences that didn't exist yet. Like vital that people are in a secure environment, encryption is there, and it's reliable, and you don't have to worry about things getting released that shouldn't be released. So another quick example, like when you're thinking about how you actually build a plan, like there's good and there's bad, right? If you ask a customer, what do you want to achieve? They might say to you something like, oh, well, I want to grow my practice. And that's where it's important for customer success managers to almost think more like sales development reps or business development reps and get really good at discovery, right? It's not enough for you to say to me that you want to grow your practice. Like, I want to know why. And I'm going to ask you why until we get to the real heart of it. So like a better example of where I'd feel comfortable entering in the objective into our success plan is if a customer said to me something like, well, I want to grow my practice by building an industry-leading virtual care program focused on text-based therapy to make sure that my patients have more choice and control over how they choose to receive healthcare, right? It's a lot more specific, a lot more measurable, a lot more actionable, ultimately going to be easier for me to implement and then show them the value from that. So a couple tips when trying to figure out objectives, like if you sell to big companies, leverage anything you can find, right? Like you're often spoiled as a CSM in that if your company is public and has an annual report, their objectives will usually be pretty clearly written in that, and you'll know exactly what you need to slot in. And that can also be really handy if you start at a lower like rung of an organization, because you can say like, hey, your CEO said this was your organizational objective in your last annual report. And here's the way we're going to help you ladder this up and prove that your investment in our platform is helping achieve those organizational objectives. As I mentioned, really important to learn how to ask the right questions during discovery. More often than not, that question can just be why a heck of a lot of times, and you'll get to the real root of the objective. And then also, if you do sell to large organizations, totally fine to have multiple objectives, right? Like it's, you're selling to Exxon, they're going to have dozens of these things because they're a humongous company. So it's okay if you need to have more isolated, could be regional objectives, departmental objectives, like just focus in on the objective that makes sense for the way that they use your product or service. Thinking about goals, this is a pretty easy one. I think everyone's probably familiar with the SMART framework. Your goals should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. Really, really easy to use model that really gets to the heart of like how you can show people that the goals you're setting ladder up into that objective. So a couple more examples. At Uberflip, we ask a customer, well, what do you want to achieve? So, well, I want more leads. Okay, well, why, right? What does that actually mean? A better goal would be, I want to increase the number of leads generated from our ebooks and our blog posts by 25% by March 31st, right? So it's specific in that we know people want to increase the number of leads from ebooks and blog posts. It's measurable, 25%. It's attainable, because 25% maybe is not that big of a lift. It's relevant to the ultimate objective, which could be to increase revenue for the business, and it's time bound, right? We know we're going to be able to look at this on March 31st and say, did we do it or not? Similarly, at OnCall, customer comes to us and says like, I want to launch a booking page for my customers so they can schedule their own appointments. I'm like, okay, great, that's a good thing. We can help you do that, but let's go a level deeper, right? Like, why do you want to launch a booking page? Well, I want to save my office admin team 5 hours a week from clerical tasks, and I want to launch that by April 1st, right? So it gives my team the ability to actually hold people accountable to that timeline, get into the specific measurements, and make sure that this is an attainable goal that we can achieve by that time frame. So a couple tips when setting goals: just use the SMART framework, keep it simple. One thing that can be really interesting and really, really valuable over time is if you mine all of your existing customer data. So that could be like closed won opportunities, partner with the marketing and sales team to see what content they might have lurking in their inboxes, compile a list of those common goals based on the objectives. It's come from the North Star metric, come from the value that you set out. But if you've established that set of common goals, like you can use those as a jumping off point with customers. It always kind of surprises me, but I guess now it doesn't surprise me anymore that like often customers struggle with this stuff. You ask them what their goals are, like you get a lot of blank stares, like the deer in the headlights kind of thing. So if you have an existing set of goals and you say, hey, customers in your industry who come to us with your size of organization typically want to do one of three things, and put those in front of them, like it can really just start to spur the conversation. You can do additional discovery and you can ultimately get to their specific goals. So using that list of common goals gives you a really good place to start with a lot of customers. Now, in terms of strategies, this is where you can start to think through, well, how does our product or service help them achieve those goals? At InVision, let's use an example here. If somebody says to us, I want to improve my design to development handoff process, like a bad strategy would be, well, we're going to provide training to your development team. Like, okay. Better way to think about that would be, again, thinking through that SMART goal framework. Like, we're going to first conduct a survey of your development team to understand the points of friction they have in their process. And then by May 30th, we're going to develop and deliver a customized product training session based on InVision's specific ability to overcome points of friction in the collaboration process and in your collaboration process. All right, so a lot more specific. It's, again, a lot more measurable, and it's things that my team can, again, control. So a couple tips for setting strategies. Like, it's a fairly simple thing. Like, you can create a detailed list of all of the ways that your organization can support your customers in their efforts to achieve their goals, right? So this is probably stuff off your website, right? It's like, what does your product do? What do your services do? What's the value your customers are going to get from them? But a key thing here is it's important not to limit yourself to only the what of what your product or service does, because there's a lot of value in things that exist outside of your product or your service usage. So, for example, at InVision, we would often hear people say like, oh, I'm really struggling to get my executive team to understand and appreciate the value of design and design thinking. And that's not something that our product necessarily could support, at least not obviously. But what we did have was a pretty rock solid team of thought leaders. Like, we had an amazing marketing team, an amazing content team, and it added a ton of value for customers when we could say, well, why don't we come into your office and do a lunch and learn? You can invite your CEO, you can invite your VPs, and we'll get them to talk about all of the ways that design can move the needle in your organization. That adds a lot of value, not necessarily related to what our product does. Similarly, if we knew that one of our customers was struggling with recruiting, it's like, well, great, maybe there's ways that we can help you build your brand as a design organization. And the way we're going to do that is by featuring you on our blog, right? We'll tell your story. You can use that to access our list of millions of designers who read our blog every month. And hopefully that helps you recruit more people into your company. So when you're thinking through these strategies, definitely want to think about like the specific ways your product or your service helps, but don't limit yourself to that. Like, think through all of the ways that you can help people holistically as an organization, and that can include other teams. And then finally, measures. So how do we make sure we're on the right track? And here's another example from OnCall. So if somebody comes to us and says, our goal is to save time for my support staff and how they schedule appointments, bad measure is we're going to look at time savings. Better measure is to ask why a bunch of times and really get into like, what does time savings mean? So we might get to a point where after doing a bunch of discovery, we can say our team spends 10 hours per week. So we want them to reduce that by 50% to 5 hours per week. And we're going to measure that by sending them a monthly survey that our team's going to send out asking how many hours are you spending every single week doing this work. And we'll do that for maybe 3 months, 6 months, whatever the time period is. And then we'll have an actionable set of data we can come back to you and present. So a couple quick tips. This is another one of those things that you can create and socialize a list of potential measures with your team based on the goals and strategies you've seen to be effective. And naturally important to make sure that every single one of these measures is time boxed and can be regularly reported on. Like, even if it's something you have to do by qualitative surveys, like, you need the ability to report on it. If it's something that you're going to rely upon your customer to like voluntarily report to you every month, that becomes really tough because you can't then take those measures back to them during the renewal process or during monthly check-ins or QBRs and say like, look how we're moving the needle. Right. So make sure that you're time boxing all these measures, but it's something that is relatively within your control to report on as well. Now, having gone through all of that, I have seen success plans fail more often than I want to admit. And there's a couple reasons that success plans tend to fail in my experience. One, they're not scalable, right? It's too tough for your team to create. Nobody knows how to reference them. People come and go. Success plans die. Nobody knows what customers care about. Two, they're not shareable, right? They end up getting siloed. They only live inside your organization. So they need to be accessible, presentable for both your team and your customers. Three, and this is kind of a criminal one, they're not trackable. Like a lot of times success plans are very tough to report on at scale, right? So it's not easy to get into those trends and those key themes where you're seeing that certain segments have consistent goals and certain segments have consistent strategies. So it's important to make sure that success plans are easy to report on and can be evolved over time. And then finally, this is an understandable one that this happens, because when you're talking about things like goals and business objectives, it can be very aspirational. But when you get so lost in the clouds that you start to lose the tacticalness of these plans, like it breaks down. Customers lose interest. Your team doesn't know how to actually connect the dots from A to B. And unless you're ensuring that these plans are tactical enough that you can easily connect them to those strategic goals, it's going to fall down. So there's a couple ways that you can overcome these challenges. Like on the scalability front, use an easy template. And that's why I like OGSM, right? It's an easy thing to train your team on, easy to wrap your head around how it works. Two, create a library of existing goals and objectives that your team can use as that jumping off point. Really handy way to make sure that people build plans for every customer. And three, make sure that they're accessible, right? Even if it means putting them in a Google Drive folder or Dropbox folder that everyone has access to, everyone will be able to get in. Makes it easy for your team to learn when you hire new people, and it makes it easy for everyone at your company to jump in and understand what your customers care about. On the shareability front, again, going back to using templates, make it easy to use. OGSM, in my experience, is a framework that customers and internal people can understand, so it works. Store them in that easily referenceable place. And then also make sure that they're the basis for every single engagement you have with your customer, right? Whether it's like a quick tech support issue, a monthly review, a QBR, a 6-month check-in. In my opinion, every single customer engagement should start with let's check in on your success plan. Let's see how we're trending towards helping you achieve your goals. On the trackability side, this can be a tough one depending on how many resources you have and the tools you have at your disposal. But even at a basic level, put it in a spreadsheet. You can make sure that the data lives somewhere that analysis is easy. We use Salesforce as our CRM. Salesforce has the ability to do pretty powerful reporting, which makes this more scalable. But I've also used Gainsight in the past, and Gainsight has a tool for this that makes it really easy to quickly roll up and understand key themes from objectives, strategies, and measures. You can also make sure that any changes to your plans get documented over time. And this is a really important one. I think sometimes CSMs have a tendency to think of success plans as finished works of art, right? You've gone through this process to build one with your customers. It looks great. You feel good about it. And then it just gets thrown in or hung on the wall and you never look at it ever again. I like to think about success plans more as finger paintings. They're never finished, they're messy, and they should constantly change over time. So make sure that those success plans, as they are changing, things are getting documented. Whether that is because you're creating a new one every single year or every single quarter, because you have an easy way to retire goals as they get achieved. Having that documented track record of progress and success is going to be really important. And then finally, I mentioned this already, but the tacticality piece is key. So start small, iterate if you need to. If people are getting lost in the clouds and don't understand how your tools laddering up to their Fortune 100 business objective, that's okay. Start smaller, right? Ask them how they get measured in a month. Ask them how they get paid in their bonuses on a quarterly basis, and figure out how to tie your tactical next steps into that specific goal. And then iterate it over time. And as we've already talked about a couple of times, just again, the more that you document a consistent set of strategies, goals, measures, you'll be able to build playbooks that your team knows are going to be effective when it's time to actually move the needle with customers. All right, and that's it. I will take a brief pause there if there are any questions about the success planning process.
Any questions from the group? Lots of great information from Sam. Sam, would you be able to share the presentation with us afterwards so we could share to the group?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are lots of, I stole a lot of great content from other smart people. So there's lots of links in here. It'll keep you busy.
That's great.
You're not stealing, Sam, you're leveraging. You're leveraging.
All right. Well, let's keep moving then. And we can talk about the best approaches to leveraging technologies. This is a question I get quite often. There are a lot of tools in this space, and it seems like a new one pops up every single day. There's the really big ones like Gatesight and Tatango that can cost an arm and a leg. There's newer players on the scene like Catalyst, which are doing really interesting things. There's local providers like Amity, which I've used in the past, which is really good. So no shortage of options if you're looking to implement one of these technologies. So the big question becomes like, which one should I pick? And my tongue-in-cheek answer is don't pick any of them. At least not yet. I think if you're a small company that's just starting out, it's not worth it. One of my favorite quotes, a fool with a tool is still a fool. So the harsh truth of this is that a customer success technology really is a tool. And a tool is only as valuable if you know how to use it and you know why you want to use it. So as you are getting started, a couple questions you can ask yourself before you actually throw down your signature on a DocuSign order form for one of these things. One, do you understand your customers, right? If you had a tool, would you be able to track the quantitative or qualitative outcomes that your product or service delivers? Two, does your model even lend itself well where this thing would help, right? And in my experience, if you are selling high dollar value deals and your team is going to have relatively small books of business, these tools often don't get used that much, right? Because you can task your CSMs with hey, you have 10 accounts, you should be best friends with every single one of those champions. You should know all the users. You don't necessarily need to have a customer success technology. They often are more useful and have more utility for scaled businesses. And then three, do you understand your playbooks? And this is the most important one. If you're not confident that you understand how to turn what one of these tools will tell you as a red account into a green account on a repeatable and consistent basis, it's going to ultimately not be worth that much money. So if the answer to any of these is I don't know, or I'm not sure, take a breath and just go back to the drawing board and think through all of these things and start small. So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. One, start with spreadsheets, everyone's favorite tool, right? So thinking about success plans, that OGSM framework. This is something we actually did at InVision for a long time. It got to be a pretty meaty spreadsheet, but every time we heard a new objective, a new goal, a new strategy, and a new measure, we'd add it into a spreadsheet, and it became a central repository for the whole team to use. So every time we got a new customer, it was they told us this is the objective. They want to grow, they want to improve collaboration. Just filter down, find that objective, and it would be associated with some common goals we've heard, the strategies we can use to support those goals, and how that customer actually measured it. And the spreadsheet worked just fine. It was a massively helpful tool from an efficiency standpoint. It was a massively helpful tool from an onboarding and training perspective internally. It allowed people to really get up and running and understand customer value a lot faster. And you can do all this in a spreadsheet in 20 minutes. Another thing you can do, another typical value of these tools is health scoring, right? It's a really nice, alluring thought to be able to say I'll be able to understand red, yellow, green accounts. And again, that's only useful if you know what to do with that information. So step one, start with a spreadsheet, right? This is OnCall Health's current health score, something that's always evolving. And because it's always evolving, it actually helps to have it in a spreadsheet where it's not this massive lift if we change it. So we walked through, we planned out our health score into adoption, usage, support, and engagement. Put different guardrails on here that can fluctuate based on what we're seeing with our customers. And it works really well, right? It helped us define our model and make sure that it's working. Step two is we then pushed it into Salesforce, right? Develop simple formulas. We've got a lot of this information in Salesforce. So with a couple of quick, easy formulas and formula fields and calculations, we're able to spit out individual health scores that tell us what we need to think through. Another thing you can do, speaking of Salesforce, is better leverage your single source of truth. So success plans. All right. If you use Salesforce, like you can do something like this. Like we built out a success plan object in Salesforce that every CSM can fill out, where they can document business objectives, goals, strategies, and measures in a really easy way. And what's beautiful about this is we get to tap into Salesforce's native reporting features to understand the common trends and the common themes, right? We can easily kick this out to the rest of the organization. Anyone on our executive team who wants to understand what a customer is working towards at any given time can just pull up the account, go to their success plan, read through all the things that they care about. The other thing that we've done, and this admittedly does require some partnership. If you're a SaaS product and you have a development team, like you're going to need their help for this, but we pass a lot of useful usage information into Salesforce. And you can pass that into a customer success tool as well. But like end of the day, Salesforce has a lot of really good features that can do this anyways. And it's pretty easy for devs to work with Salesforce's API. So we pass along a ton of information about like how many appointments are being created, how much people are billing if they're using our billing tools, how appointments are trending or growing over time. A really interesting one that we look at is the number of cancellations that happen as a percentage of all the appointments that are getting booked. Good little indicator of health or potential patient confusion if that number spikes. So there's tons and tons of stuff that we can do based on this. And again, Salesforce has included baked in tools that allow you to automate this, that allow you to report on this, and that allow you to scale this. So you don't necessarily need to invest in a very meaty other tool to do it. You can also piggyback off things that other teams are doing. So we use HubSpot here at OnCall Health, and like they've got a lot of really interesting workflows built out, but more importantly, they've got a lot of really good experience in how you build out a scaled customer communications framework. So when we want to do things like automate parts of our customer journey, let's say by following up with a customer after 6 months to see if they've booked 25 appointments or not, like rather than trying to figure out, well, how do I do that in Gainsight? Do I need a Gainsight admin to come in and help me? It's like, hey, marketing team, you're used to building out these customer journeys. Can you help us do this in HubSpot? And because we've got all our information in Salesforce, seamlessly flows into HubSpot already. So we were able to build out these lifecycle journeys very, very quickly. And we've now actually succeeded in automating probably upwards of like 50% of our customer lifecycle in a way that prior to being able to do this was like one poor guy on our team's job to like manually send out a lot of this information and just try and keep tabs on this stuff. So this is a really, really handy way to tap into the resources your team already has on staff. And then finally, you can get creative with existing knowledge sharing platforms your team might already be using. So thinking about our onboarding and implementation process, like we use Notion for pretty much everything here at OnCall. We document our company wiki in there. We've got like an internal knowledge base, and Notion has very powerful tools, a lot like Jira, for building Kanban boards. So we'll actually document all of our new customer implementations in here. We have templates that people can create. And we've got a team of implementation specialists who will move these things around based on what needs to happen. All right, so wrapping things up. We've been talking for a while now.
I have a question, comment, and then also
any of the other
on the call, please ask as well. So one of the things I was thinking too, Sam, is we often, a lot of the startups often work with HubSpot as a CRM as well, and I think the nice thing is there's discounts available for HubSpot through the Innovation Factory and different RICs. So, you can get the sequencing application, or even at the very basic level, you get templating, which can automate at least the generation of the piece. But I think, even on a HubSpot, by creating some custom properties, you can then run reports on it pretty simply.
Yep.
So I think, if people are thinking, hey, I need to have Salesforce, I think, some of the things you can do with, if you have a small number of clients, you can still add some of the great things Sam's talking about with a few simple properties that you can update, that you can then do some tracking and reporting on. So yeah, I think that was really helpful, because I think, sometimes, it's if, as you said, and I'm a big believer in this, is instead of jumping into a system, a new tool, make sure you have the processes and systems and things in place internally, and versus getting into something you don't quite understand, or it's not made for you. So try to use these other tools until you break the tools, and then look to get a more formalized software product. So
yeah, I love that thought process, right? Like, it's a very nice problem to have if your spreadsheet's breaking, because you're so successful in using your health scores. So I love that. And honestly, I agree. I think HubSpot is one of the best tools in the SaaS world. Like, if I was starting a new business today, no question, HubSpot would be where I'd put not only the marketing automation piece, but also I'd use their CRM tool, because it's really good. It's lightweight, it's easy to use, and comes with a package, which is good.
Yeah, and I think for small teams, it's good. Where you're not super reporting intensive, but yeah. Thanks, Sam. Anybody else have a question for Sam? Pretty quiet crowd today. If this was back when we were in person, I wouldn't let anyone leave without asking a question. So we have a few questions for Sam before the end of the session. So thanks, Sam.
Yeah, you got it. All right. Well, last section here, and strategies for scaling out a customer success team. And I'll caveat this before we jump in, and that there's no real right or wrong way to do this, right? This is one of those things that can be tricky to talk about in a presentation, because it really depends on the nature of your team, the nature of your customers, the nature of your business. But I'll do my best to share with some common threads I've seen in the companies I work for about how this can work well. So I thought I'd start as well with I'm in hockey mood. So with some hockey lessons, and as a Leafs fan, I will admit it does pain me to put Carey Price on a slide. But there's a common thing in hockey. Now, the idea is like great teams are built from the net out. And I guess it doesn't only apply to hockey. Could apply to any sport in which there's a goalie involved. And the idea with building from the net out is you start with your goalie. It's the most important position on the team. They're involved in every play. So your first priority should be get a really good goalie before you do anything else. Once you've done that, think about the defense, right? After the goalie, they're your second priority. If you have a great goalie, really good defenseman, your team's probably going to be pretty good. And then the last step is getting good forwards, right? So it doesn't mean that they're not important, but if you don't have a good goalie, you don't have good defense. As most Leafs fans can attest, like if you don't have a good goalie who can perform and you don't have a good D, like it doesn't matter how good your forwards are. So thinking about how that applies into customer success, similar sort of net out framework, you got to start with your support team. If this doesn't work, like nothing else is going to matter. You won't be able to invest into customer success properly. And we'll get into a bunch of the reasons why. So in my mind, always start with support, your first priority. Once you've done that, you can layer on what we will refer to as success. And we'll get into a little bit more specifics about what that actually means. And then once you've got a customer success framework in place, like that's where you can start to layer in specializations. So that could be renewal managers, implementation managers, figuring out how you work with the sales team. But just like building from the net in hockey, like if you don't have the success team, but more importantly, you don't have a support team, it doesn't work. All right. So this is a nice little picture here. I don't know exactly which player that is, but I can tell you he's not a goalie. And sure, he might be saving his team from getting scored on, but like he is not ultimately doing his job here, right? Because he's doing the goalie's job. He's not going out and scoring, right? So thinking about how that translates into a customer success world, like if your CSMs are having to do the work of a support team, they're not going to be doing the work of building relationships and adding customer value. So investing in tech support. First and foremost importance in this is getting the right people, right? Your tech support team will definitely be your most consistent and regular point of customer contact and engagement. So it is vitally important to get these hires right. And frankly, like I don't even care what they cost, right? Like if you find a person that has that sweet blend of customer engagement skills, technical skills, industry expertise, aligns really well with the needs of your business and your customers, like you can't pay them enough, right? Like they are the most valuable part of your team. Make sure you get it right. Two, once you have those people, make sure that they're regularly investing in documenting and updating content in your knowledge base. Only going to pay dividends as your team scales and your customer base scales. Really good knowledge base makes it easy for you to onboard your team as it grows, but also allows you to invest in not offloading, but like getting customers to help themselves before they reach out to your team. And then finally, from a process standpoint, so clearly define when and how your support team engages with customers. These processes can be meaty and they can take time to figure out. But that process piece is key, like making sure that your team knows how to engage with technical support, where to engage with technical support. You've got common SLAs for how long it's going to take them to get back to people. Will give everyone else the confidence to be able to go and focus on the things they need to do rather than trying to do the job of the technical support team. So once you've got that tech support team in place, you've kind of shored up your goal. What do you focus on? And the answer here is an annoying one, that it depends. The only certainty, as I mentioned, is that there's really no right way to do customer success. But B, you do need some form of proactive account and relationship management that you can layer on top of your tech support team. And this is the typical view of support versus success. Like when you just have a support organization, they're inherently going to be problem focused. They're going to be reactive to when customers reach out to share that they're having an issue. Because of that, it's going to be transactional. The goal is really to just maintain that relationship, maintain an experience. And the way you're going to measure it is by focusing on speed. Like how fast did we resolve this issue? When you're shifting that model to focus on success or add success, you're going from a problem-based mindset to an opportunistic mindset. Right? Instead of reactive, you're hiring people and tasking them with being proactive. Instead of being transactional, they're going to be relational. They're going to go out and actually build relationships with people so that they can be proactive in nurturing those opportunities. You're goal-focused instead of maintenance-focused, and your goals are really adoption and value. And how you measure the team is in their success in driving adoption and value versus how fast they do things. So it's definitely not easy. Right? Like going from a support to a success mindset is tough. And really the speed at which you can make that shift is going to depend upon the needs of your customers and the goals of your business. So this is a couple examples of how you can start to think through when do you bring aboard a customer success team, and then what do you task them with doing? So let's say you're an early stage startup or company that needs to focus on landing new business. So frankly, this is where OnCall Health lies right now. All right, we are still early stage, and we know that we have a goal of dramatically expanding the number of organizations that we work with. So because of that, we don't have necessarily sales resources to devote to the expansion process. So when we look for CSMs, a key part of what we're searching for is people who excel at nurturing those relationships into upsell processes without having hands-on support. If you're a complex product and you require a significant amount of technical or other resources to get up and running, it's going to be more important that you focus on finding people who excel at driving adoption and who can do complex change management and are patient as anything. And if you sell an expensive product, maybe you have a huge number of people, you're selling $9 a month subscriptions or something like that. It's important that you find people who are process oriented and who have experience leveraging technology to drive adoption, growth, or retention at scale. Interestingly, I've often found people best suited for these types of roles actually come from the marketing world because they're used to using technologies like HubSpot to be really effective. So a quick model you can use in thinking about this is, just plot on a 2x2 grid your customers' needs and your customers' maturity. If you have really simple customer needs, low maturity customers, go out and find CSMs who can focus on creating content at scale. Self-service resources, probably that marketing mindset again, but people who can think at scale because customers don't need to be really handheld that much. And they don't have a ton of complex maturity. So maybe we need to educate them over time on how they can improve along that maturity scale. If you have low maturity customers that have really complex needs, this is where you can invest into a CS team that's going to be really relationship focused. It's going to do that hand-holding approach. It's going to be really good at change management. to walk people through their journey with you. If you have high maturity customers with simple needs, I think you can find people who are really process and scale focused. So very similar to what you can do with content, but probably focus more on growth and driving growth or unlocking growth. And then finally, high maturity, high complex customers. This is where you really need those adoption experts, like people who will understand the industry you work in, the specific intricacies of your product, and can help translate customer requirements into your workflows, change those workflows if need be. Like, this is really the industry expert bucket. If you have a complex customer with complex needs and are typically very high maturity, like, you really want to invest into that industry expert profile of a CSM. The other thing that you can do at early stage, though, like, just find people who are pretty flexible. It's not to say like, you're going to find the same person, you can just drop them into each one of these boxes. But if you find people with a growth mindset who are willing to learn, like maybe it's someone who is experienced in working with SMBs and doing the content scale thing, but wants to learn how to be a more hands-on account manager, like, great. All right. Maybe you can move them into a relationship focused bucket or the adoption focused bucket, because as your company grows, naturally it's going to depend on the way that you're thinking about your product evolution, but you're going to need people who can be flexible and who can move between these buckets. So if you can find that unicorn, hire them immediately. And then once you've matured, or once you've done that, once you've got that success layer that you've layered on top of your support team, think about role specialization. And this is one of those annoying slides that just has a bunch of different models, because it's really tough to hammer home like which model is going to work right for your business. I've been a part of every one of these in previous companies, where the model was tech support plus implementation plus account management, technical support plus implementation, and CS that's more focused on like value and leaves the sales up to somebody else. I've also been a part of Model D, where there's really complex account teams oriented around really large accounts, where you've got a training team, a technical support team, but then you've got CS focused on value, you've got renewal managers focused on renewals, and you've got AEs that are focused on expanding relationships with current accounts. So there's no right model, there's no wrong model. There's only really the model that works for your business at any given time. And it's important to keep an open mind and layer on these functions as you need to. But the key things I wanted to highlight in this is, like, one, the technical support bucket is still there, right? That's always going to be the foundation, regardless of which model you decide to pursue. But two, like, a really important thing, it's probably the first thing I would do when you decide to expand and start to specialize roles, is implementation. Like, this is a common thread in pretty much any model. Like, if you don't have people who are focused on implementation, either at scale or because they're working one-on-one with customers, it becomes really hard for CSMs and AEs and renewal managers and AMs to focus on actually doing their roles as well, right? It's a very similar burden as having to do tech support. If you're focused on onboarding and implementation, you're not going to be focused on value or growth or relationship building. So this is probably the one constant I would say, like, as you start to expand your team, more than likely, the first and most valuable group you're going to want to invest into is implementation. All right, and that's it for me. So quickly wrap things up. Some of these 5 lessons from the last 10 years. One, everything starts with the North Star. Like, just make sure you have a detailed understanding of what your customers care about, how their problems overlap with the things that you're good at, and then try as best as you can to orient your whole company, but at least the customer success team's processes around achieving that outcome for your customers. 2, map out your journey. So it's a big investment, but it's a worthwhile investment. It doesn't have to be a massive project. You can start small and build on it over time. But that map is going to tell your customers how you're going to get them to value, and it's going to be a guide for your customer success team to get them there. 3, success plans. So important. And I think once you've mapped out your journey, like, your plan is basically that regular checkpoint against that journey. So make sure those plans are scalable, shareable, trackable, tactical, everything that we walked through, and make sure they're the basis for all of your customer engagement. For the tech, the short answer is don't worry about it. Make sure that you know exactly how you want to use it before you decide to pull the trigger and invest into it. And then 5, as you scale out your team, make sure you build from the net out. Like technical support, the most vital thing that you're going to invest into. After that might be implementation, but before anything else, make sure that you've got a reliable and fantastic team of technical support specialists who can focus on making sure customer inquiries are going to get answered quickly, routed to the right spot, and then can be that rock for the rest of the team, so that as you layer on specialization, people know that they don't have to worry about the support piece because they've got people who know how to do that better. All right. And that's it for me. Thank you for the attention. I'm sorry for subjecting you to the sound of my voice for an hour and a half, but hopefully some useful stuff in there.
That was a terrific presentation for sure. Thank you, Sam.
So do we have any other questions? I have, of course I have questions, but so does anybody else have any questions for Sam now that he's got to the end of his presentation? Don't be shy.
Can you use,
So one question I have, Sam, is the, from customer success, I see there's definitely opportunities to upsell, right? So they can sell them if there's another layer of the product or, whatever, that's an opportunity. Do you, like, for example, in your business, I was thinking that maybe there might be an opportunity to ask for referrals, right? Where, because doctors would know other doctors or mental health professionals would know other clinics, how do you handle, is there a way that you handle that, or have you put something in place before where that's like part of what the customer success person's doing now that you've got an account up and going and it's successful and they're hitting their metrics? How would you handle that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That customer advocacy piece is a key part of a lot of CS roles, especially early stage. But it's funny you bring that up because we actually had a conversation about this last week. One of our goals, like we have pretty large customers, like one of our big customers is Shoppers Drug Mart. And we have an extremely small footprint. Like they use us for one, maybe 2 core use cases, but there's lots of growth potential in working with them outside of that. So one of our goals is, well, like, how do we unlock that? And who are the right people to do that? And we're starting to explore like different approaches where like we can partner CS with the BDR team or account executives who are just either better or have more time for things like outbound prospecting. But the first step in that process, regardless of whether we're going to have BDRs actually do outbound into existing accounts or have CS do that, is to make sure CS is asking for those referrals. Like that's always going to be your best jumping off point with any customer. And what I love about that question of like asking, hey, do you know anybody else who could use or benefit from our services, is it's just so enlightening for so many different reasons, right? Like best case scenario, people are like, oh yeah, you know what? I'm actually a part of, a local doctors group. And, I think that a bunch of people there would love to chat with you, right? So you're going to fill your pipeline with a bunch of interesting and warm referrals. Like worst case scenario, but people are going to be like, no, I hate your product and I would never recommend it to anybody else. But that's still valuable, right? Like a customer that tells you they hate you is much better than a customer that tells that that's just indifferent. Like apathy is the worst possible thing you can have in customer success. So asking that question is going to tell you how you can ultimately make people successful, right? Like it's never going to be a bad question because you're going to have positive outcomes and things for your team to focus on, regardless of whether or not people are willing to give you a referral.
Great, thanks.
Perfect. Anyone else? You can talk about your specific case, your specific company. Great opportunity to ask these questions right now.
Yeah, Sam has a good background of working with growing companies. So even though he's worked for a large company and his company is growing now, he was at a bunch of companies when they were much smaller and dealt with early stage challenges as well. So there's a
Mark, do you want to go ahead? Mark Hurt.
Thanks, guys. Great presentation. It always resonates with me when we're jumping around. I mean, in my 15 years, can count on probably both hands and feet how many different CRMs and data tracking iterations of an Excel sheet you have. But I think, we still battle with it. And it's like, well, how do I make the CRM perfect to remind me to call these customers? And I think you boil it down to the basics. And Mark, your comment about the referral, and obviously within the presentation, everything you talked about today too, you gotta just use old school tactics in conjunction with those tools, because they're not going to be perfect. But yeah, I follow a couple of blogs online, and it was like for selling in the 80s and 70s. Guess what? Some of the stuff hasn't changed. Maybe you're not physically doing these things, but it's really what it boils down to. So have that human element. I think the asking for referrals, I know, Mark, you've talked about this ad nauseum during the presentations, but hearing it from yourself, again, it adds legitimacy, Sam, to everything you're talking about as well, and obviously going through the process. So I'm a big fan of everything you talked about. I don't necessarily have a question, but more or less, I think we're all battling the same thing, and it's, let some of your customers do your selling. And now more than ever, it's acceptable to ask for referrals. Everybody wants that, Mark, do you have a guy or that gal or that person that does something for you? It's way easier to source that out than having to go do the rigmarole yourself.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark.
Looks like Adam has her hand up as well. Adam, do you want to unmute and ask a question?
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark. My name is Adam Lank. I work with Zero Cloud Accounting. Sam, great presentation. I really, really enjoyed the entire journey you took us on there. I was a CSM at one point with HubDoc, which actually then got bought by Zero in the cloud accounting space. So I've definitely got a soft spot for all things CS, but I now work as a people lead in a very sales-oriented role. So I guess the question I had for you, Sam, was around, we're a global company, but we're out of Australia, New Zealand. So the Canadian geo is very much kind of a tech startup within a much larger mothership. As it stands now, as much as I want to push for, a CS function within our org, really the account manager, which is our account executive, they wear the full cycle hat. So they're doing their own prospecting all the way to their own account management. How would you envision reworking like a CS plan to, make sure we're handling that post-sale relationship, but knowing they don't have the bandwidth to be able to do all the things that, you've talked about today?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thanks for coming, Adam. So it's interesting. I'll actually go back to my experience at InVision. When I first started there, it was a model that was almost exactly like that, right? Like we called ourselves CSMs, but like carried a quota for upsell, carried a quota for renewals, responsible for onboarding, responsible for doing everything. I'll say the only way I think it worked was because we got the amount of investment from the product team and the operational side of the business that it took a bunch of the things off of our plate, so that like we didn't necessarily have to worry about it, right? Like from an onboarding implementation standpoint, right? Like unless your product is so easy to use, where like, really the only work for that account manager is to like throw a bunch of users onto a webinar and do it at scale, or even potentially funnel people into something like an academy, send them resources, training videos, like that's going to be a really big problem. Or like if you need people focused on growth and like you have that account management model, like finding people who can do it all is going to be tough, but then like they're just not going to have enough hours in the day to focus on it, right? So you've got to get the buy-in from product team to make sure the product is like easy to use. You got to get the buy-in from the marketing team to figure out how they can help you like with the customer communication piece, the support team to figure out how you can make sure that like the support experience is so rock solid that like any sort of technical training request, NAM feels comfortable just kicking it directly to the support team to handle. Like there's just a lot of, I think, orchestration work that has to go on behind the scenes for that kind of thing, right? So it's almost like viewing that person as was really like a quarterback more than anything, use another sports analogy. Like, they're not necessarily going to be the ones like doing all the work, but actually maybe better analogy, let's go with the coach. Like they're not necessarily going to be doing all this stuff, but they're going to be calling the plays, and they're going to be relying on the people in different parts of the organization to help them fill those gaps.
Got it. Thanks, Sam. No, that's really great. And I mean, so much of what we talked about on with a CS lens is so transferable to this team, but yeah, love the presentation. Thanks again.
Hey, Sam, we got a question from Oliver in the Q&A, and he says, sometimes customers don't understand the technology and depth of feasibility. What process should we apply so we can educate them and convince them?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks.
So I'd say it's a little tough, I guess, not to have the specifics. So if you have anything specific to share, that would be great. We could dig into that. But it's not uncommon, I would say, especially early stage. And especially if you're building the kind of company that is challenging a status quo, where customers are either not going to understand the go-to-market strategy, they're not going to understand how the technology works. or they're not going to understand like the value to their business. So I actually think this probably goes back to where we started this presentation in thinking about like defining your North Star metric, right? Like sit down with a marketing team, sit down with a sales team, sit down with a product team, and really try and get to like the heart of why a customer is signing up or why they might be interesting. And just like go through that friction-filled process to understand as much as you can about the needs of a customer. And that should hopefully highlight some of the things that you can do to make sure that they do understand how the technology works, and then more importantly, how that's going to actually impact their business. From a CS perspective, like once you've got them into your process, if you're still finding that they're unsure about how the technology works and the feasibility works, like you probably could invest into the implementation process, do a lot of like meaty hand-holding and change management work to just make sure that like you understand their workflows, you understand their needs. If you're going to recommend change, like over communicate why. So for example, like it's not uncommon for us at OnCall to run into situations where customers will come aboard and then be like, oh, like we didn't think it was going to work this way. Like this is our current process and like we just can't plug it in. And that's not unexpected for us because we sell to healthcare. It's a really antiquated space in a lot of cases. People use really antiquated processes, and a lot of cases people still use paper files, right? So, it's I think human nature as well for them to come in and want to change the least amount of stuff as they can. Like people don't want to. Nobody likes change. So one of the things that we have to be really careful of and pay a lot of attention to in the kickoff process and the implementation process is like how we map out existing workflows and then how we manage that change process, because we do need you to change the way that your business currently works, right? So that for us goes back to, again, the goals, like why did you sign up? Okay, you wanted to grow your practice, you wanted to save your team time. Like that's going to mean that there are things that need to be tweaked. Here are the things that we recommend tweaking. Here's some proof and some validation for like where we've done this in the past and how it has helped other clients like you be successful, and just consistently kind of beat that drum to make sure that people are going to buy into that change management process and trust you enough that like when you're telling them like, hey, yeah, you might not understand fully how this works, you don't think it's feasible, but like here's success stories from other people in the past, like that's really the only way I think you can do it.
Thanks, Sam. Any other questions from any of the group? Raise your hand and unmute or type in a Q&A. Fedor has a question. Do you want to unmute yourself, Fedor, and ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for the presentation, Sam. Fantastic information. And I wanted to ask a question building on one of the previous people who asked the question about this responsibility split on post-implementation phase when you have several roles like EEs, relationship manager, CSM. As far as I understand your point of view, it's better to have different kind of specialization rather than have one account manager who's responsible for everything. But having different people responsible for different functions, how can we make sure that one person responsible for this ultimate success, whatever it means? Because when you have several people responsible for this, you have nobody responsible, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point, right? It's I think it's something that every company struggles with as you layer on that implementation, is like making sure that you have a true account team in which everyone feels empowered, because you're right. Like when no single person owns it, it's easy for people to just think, oh, it's somebody else's problem. I don't know if there's a silver bullet for that, other than like making sure that everyone has access to the same things and like knows what a source of truth is. For us, that's Salesforce. So like we put everything onto the account level in Salesforce. The success plan lives there. Hopefully it gets updated there. All of the product utilization and customer health information lives there. All of our automation is baked into that. And like we list out on the account object itself, like who is responsible as the CSM, who is the salesperson that sold the deal, who's the implementation manager that implemented, and we bug all of those people when things don't work. So there's a piece of the technology I think that can work. Otherwise, I think it's just a question of setting expectations with your team, right? And that's like a management thing, an organizational culture thing more than anything else. But like, you just need people who are willing to go above and beyond to make sure that they're doing the right things for the customer, and who are biased towards action. Like, customer has a problem. Now, if it's an implementation manager who can jump in and solve it, amazing. If it's a CSM who can solve it, amazing. If it's a salesperson who can jump in and solve it, amazing, right? Like, you just need to have the right culture that's always biased towards action, and making sure that nobody's ever going to treat an account like a hot potato. So I know that's not a specific answer, but I think it's a really tough problem that the only ways you can really solve are just by always keeping that top of mind and orienting everything you do as a leader and everything that your organization does culturally around just making sure that your customers' ultimate well-being and health is a company thing and not an individual thing.
Well, thank you for your answer, and I hope OnCall have this type of culture when everyone's feel responsibility for customer success.
Yeah, actually, one other quick little thing that comes to mind. I think it was FreshBooks. I might be wrong on that. They had a really interesting model for a long time, and I don't know if they still do it, but basically everyone who started at FreshBooks, regardless of your role, you could be an accountant, you could be a customer success manager, but you had to work the phones for 3 months. So you'd sit and you'd answer customer calls, and that was what you would do for the first 3 months. And it really, I think, grounded people in that understanding of customer challenges and customer empathy. And hopefully, it seemed to work pretty well for them, but they take that back to their individual roles. And they even might've done something too, somebody phoned into support, and the phone would just ring and ring because maybe everyone was busy. It would actually just round robin to the entire company. So all the way up to and including the CEO, if that phone wasn't going to get answered, CEO would pick it up and he'd be doing technical support as well. So I think there are ways, when you're relentlessly focused on a culture of customer centricity from early days, you can build it into the way that you onboard customers, and hopefully as your company scales, you don't lose it.
Thank you.
Any other final questions for Sam? Thanks everyone for asking the questions too. Lots of great follow-on conversations. Any final questions for Sam before he helps more employees and customers be successful at OnCall after this?
No? Okay. Perfect. I think we're good. Well, Sam, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mark.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And I will send out the recording, as well as you mentioned, we're okay to send out your presentation.
Slides. Yeah, I will send that over to you.
Perfect. So I will send that out within the next few days, and hopefully everyone found this very informative. Have a good day, everybody.
Great job, Sam. Thank you.
Thanks. See you guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.